So let's talk for a moment about core values. I know core values define an individual as the person that they are. And there are some important core values that I think I've observed in learning about you that you've lived. And one of the most important, let's start with, is diversity and inclusion. Right. I think you've committed your life to making sure that you provide opportunities and important opportunities for all people in all levels of your organization. Mm-hmm. And that kind of builds on one of the questions that somebody in the audience proposed in talking about how you think about diversity and inclusion in the context of TIAA as the CEO.
Well, first, with our company, TIAA, one has to recognize this is part of our legacy and our history. We had the first woman on the board of a Fortune 100 company in the 1940s, first African-American officer of a major insurance company in the 1950s. My predecessor, Cliff Wharton, was the first African-American CEO of a Fortune 100 company. So the first thing in the context of my company is diversity and inclusion are bedrock of who we are and what we stand for. Secondly, in the modern era, it's, as it has always been, it's obviously sort of the right thing to do, right? There's no one now, I think, who sort of would push and doubt that. But the third thing is there's increasing evidence, quantitative science, economic science kind of evidence, that diverse and inclusive organizations, first, diverse and inclusive teams make better decisions, and organizations composed of such teams end up having better financial performance. There's a book from a professor at the University of Michigan, who's a professor of economics, law, and computer science, or 2 or 3 different things, named Scott Page, who's validated all this. So, if you're responsible, as we are, for the life savings of 5 million Americans, you want to make the best possible decisions. Mm-hmm. And if it turns out, even if you didn't think it was part of our legacy, if you didn't think it was the right thing to do, but you just wanted to do the right thing in terms of making money for people, you don't have diverse and inclusive teams. And it paid off really well for us just before the economic crisis started, because there was a lot of tension in the organization about these subprime investments. And because we had very inclusive voices speaking honestly about how they saw the risks, we managed to de-risk our portfolio not long, but before the crisis got underway. So it's a real value to having folks who aren't in groupthink and who are going to come in with a diverse point of view, but be included in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So let's turn for a moment to think and talk about leadership, which we all know is very, very important. Mm-hmm. There's a faculty member at the University of Chicago, Steve Kaplan, at the Booth School of Business, that has spent a great deal of time looking at leadership and characteristics of a CEO. And his hypothesis is that sometimes the characteristics of a CEO are different from the characteristics of a C-suite. Can you talk about, as you think about, what are the most important characteristics as you've learned and stepped into these roles and made an impact?
So back to the notion of maybe flipping things around a little bit, I've come to the conclusion that leadership is really all about followership, which is to say, if you think you're a leader and you look over your shoulder and no one is following you, you're out there by yourself. You may be an entertainer, but you're not a leader. And so from that, I've developed, what are the things that would make someone appealing enough that others want to follow that individual? And it strikes me, just an observation, there are 4 traits that allow leaders to be leaders, i.e. to engender followership. One of them has got to be expertise. Folks don't want to follow someone who's a novice at everything. And expertise does not necessarily mean you stayed in school and got that advanced degree. It could be deep expertise on how this company operates, or deep expertise on what our customers want. But some expertise, and McKinsey used to call it a spike. What's that one thing that people think about that differentiates you from others? So that's one. The second is the ability to articulate where you want to go. Folks are not going to follow a leader if the leader can't articulate in some compelling, clear fashion, where do you want to go? We're confronting this a little bit in my own company now. We have been on a journey called Vision 2020. The acquisition of Naveen was a big step in that. As we get closer to 2020, the company's saying, well, where are we going to go now? And so there's a hungering always to have a sense of where does that leader want you to go. And you can buy in or not, but at least be clear. The third is one that I think surprises people, which is empathy. Right? We often think of leaders as, stand up and show no weakness. My sense is, if you want to engender followership, folks don't want to be treated like cogs in some big machine that you have planned. They want to be treated like human beings, so be empathetic. And I actually got that a little bit from Colin Powell, who is a great leader. And he said to me, Roger, in the military, it's not aye, sir. It is aye, sir, and then you go out and do what you want. No, not that people are subordinate, but the amount of energy you put into following orders depends on how people feel. Mm-hmm. And so empathy is really important. People have lives. It'd be nice to think that we're all work, a la robots 24/7, but that's just not the way it works. And the final thing is fortitude, right? You don't want a leader who is the first one to panic when things go wrong. Oh, that's comforting. Right? So obviously I learned that at 9/11, right? There comes a point where calm fortitude, when all else fails and everyone else is in frantic mode, helps you be a bit of a leader. So those are some theories I've developed. There are a bunch of other theories around leadership. The final thing is it's got to be authentic to who you are, right? So those are the things that I find sort of work for me and feel natural to me. That may not be a style of leadership that works for 250 people in this room. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the way I think about it.
Just looking at a question from the audience, and may I read it? What is your outlook for the economy and financial markets of 2019 into 2020? You knew we couldn't let you get away with asking this question.
And so I think the outlook for financial markets, mine, maybe I think ours, is the phrase I think we're sort of using is that the journey gets a little harder. And what does that mean? We've seen phenomenal performance in almost every asset class. There's some talk in the market that might be disrupted as the economy turns. So I think what we see, at least what I see, is probably somewhat slower growth in 2020, but still positive. I don't think we're going to sort of fall into a recession, but I think the growth is going to be relatively muted. And having said that, I still think there will continue to be search for really good returns. I think many asset classes will continue to rise, but maybe not at the same breakneck speed that we've seen of late. And I think all of that is just sort of consistent with both an economy that's sort of growing but more slowly, and the fact that I think central banks, I tend to think around interest rates and central bank activities, are going to be cautious, both sides. Inflation doesn't look like it's about to break out, so I don't think many central banks are going to be moving aggressively up, which would slow things down, obviously, in markets. At the same time, interest rates are already relatively low. We're experimenting with even negative rates. I don't think most central banks want to move much further in that direction. And that's not a forecast of what the Fed's going to do. I don't know what they're going to do. But if interest rates don't change dramatically in one way or the other, and the economy globally and in the U.S. continues to chug along at a modest rate, then I think that's going to be, generally speaking, supportive for most asset classes, even though many of them are relatively high and fully priced, and even though many people worry that this has been a very, very long expansion, very, very long bull market, it doesn't necessarily have to sort of come crashing to an end next year.
I've been spanning many of the questions that are coming up from the audience, and there's several references to a retirement crisis. Right.
So,
give us your perspective on.
Yep, absolutely. So I think of this as a retirement challenge. If we don't act, it will become a retirement crisis. What are the elements of retirement challenge? First, demographics. Aging baby boomers, by definition, getting closer and closer to retirement. 10,000 baby boomers hit 65, the legacy retirement age, every day. And so you can see that this is mounting. Second reason why it's a challenge is the decline of the defined benefit plan and the rise of the 401k. The 401k was never meant to be a retirement plan. It was meant to be a supplemental plan. And yet for many, it is the source of their retirement savings. Third is too little retirement savings. My former colleagues and still friends of the Fed, I think, have estimated that the shortfall in retirement savings is $4, $5, $6, $7 trillion, huge. And then final component of it is the bedrock retirement savings vehicle and publicly provided annuity for everybody is Social Security. And the Social Security trustees have already said that the trust fund, as it's called, will be depleted in 2035, I think. So 4 components of a challenge.